Careers in statistics can be very varied, and sometimes even in one individual's career there can be a huge amount of variety. I have the pleasure of the company of Karen Facey, who is, I think, a good example of this, as we might discover as we discussed with Karen the different stages in her own career. Now, Karen, your training began, I believe, with A-level statistics. So would you like to tell us where it went after that?
That's right. After doing A-level statistics, I knew that I loved mathematics-based subjects, and so I signed up for a degree in maths and computing at City University in London. And I quickly realised that I was terrible at computing. Those were the days when we never had a computer at college. That shows you how old I am. And I quickly realised that actually it's statistics I love. So I focused on statistics and did a pure statistics degree. But that did involve a year at BP Research in Sunbury-on-Thames. So I was able to see statistics in practice during my degree. And I actually have a degree with industrial applications.
So when you completed your degree, when you graduated, what were the thoughts in your mind about where your career might go, and what were your initial steps in taking a career in statistics?
Well, I applied for a variety of jobs because I had no idea really what I wanted to do. So I applied to the civil service, to the gas industry, and to the pharmaceutical industry. And I ended up with a job with Pfizer down at Sandwich in Kent. But after a year, I decided I needed a little bit more training, and so I applied for a PhD at Reading, but which was sponsored by a pharmaceutical company, Roche, in Switzerland. So I wanted to do something that was practical, but I wanted to increase my learning and knowledge about statistical theory as well.
Because the project was sponsored by Roche, did they have an interest in the project that you did as part of your PhD?
Absolutely. I went to their base in Switzerland every year, so I had hands-on experience of working with their clinical trials. And my topic was interim analysis, and it was wonderful because the interim analysis I did actually stopped at the first look at the data with a successful treatment effect. So they were very pleased with the outcomes of the study, and so my PhD included new theory, new analysis, and a practical example as well.
That sounds a perfect outcome.
Yes, it is.
When you graduated from your PhD, did you work with the same pharmaceutical company? What happened then?
They actually sponsored my postdoc at Reading, so I stayed in academia for a couple of years, but they did lure me to work in Welwyn Garden City at the UK headquarters, where I was involved in a number of large clinical trials, mainly for AIDS products. And I found that incredibly exciting. It was at a time when AIDS as a disease had a huge stigma and really no effective treatments, and I was working on a product that made a huge difference and saved lives, and that was an incredibly exciting thing to do. And as a statistician, it was marvellous because we were working on surrogate outcomes, and there was a real need to explain the statistical approaches involved not only to our own company but also to drug regulators as well. And so on a number of levels it was very rewarding.
That must have been exciting indeed. Can you say a little bit more within the context of this large team that must have been working on the project, what the essential role of the statistician was, what the special role of the statistician was?
I was very lucky to work in a company who respected statisticians, and so particularly in phase 3 trials we were involved from the outset in the design of quite novel design trials with large numbers of patients, and involved with investigators who would be running the trials, and also obviously in the collection of large quantities of data that are required for these multi-million-pound trials, and then in analysis and presentation to regulatory authorities. So the statisticians were really involved right from the outset through to the presentation of results, which was great.
So did you stay in the pharmaceutical world? I think your career took a different turn, so tell us about that.
It did indeed. After having been with Roche for about 3.5 years, I moved to work for what is now called the Medicines and Healthcare Products Regulatory Agency. And that's the agency that license all the medicines that we can obtain from our doctor or buy over the counter in a pharmacy. And I was there as the second statistical assessor, and really I was assessing drug companies' submissions about the efficacy of a drug, that is, whether a drug works or not.
So in a sense you were poacher turned gamekeeper, if I could mischievously say that. But there were definitely two sides of the table in these sorts of experiences, I guess. So what was it like moving from the commercial pharmaceutical world to the more public regulatory world?
It was excellent to have had the experience in the world of drug development to understand what's possible, and then to move from working on a trial that might take 2 or 3 or 4 years indeed, to having to review a whole dossier of evidence within a couple of weeks. So a lot more turnaround, a lot of different products were seen from a variety of different disease indications. So I found that fascinating to move from kind of one disease, AIDS, very interesting in depth, to a variety of diseases and seeing the types of trials that were performed, the challenges in the analysis and the conduct of those studies, and really being a sort of little policeman about, have they performed this trial appropriately, have they analysed it correctly, and have they interpreted it appropriately? And that was exciting.
I'm sure the answers to those questions was always yes.
Variation, I think.
But you stayed in the public world even when you left MHRA. Tell us where you moved to next.
That's right. A psychiatrist who I worked with at the MHRA told me he was setting up a new organisation in Scotland called the Health Technology Board for Scotland. This was a brand new arm of the NHS in Scotland, which was being set up to assess new medicines and any new devices or interventions that might be used here in the NHS. And that would be using a much broader form of assessment than pure statistical analysis. It was using something called health technology assessment, which I knew nothing about at that stage, but quickly learned about. And really it's a holistic assessment of the value of a medicine and how it should be used in the health service. So I moved from just using sort of methodological and mathematical modelling to a much broader sort of policy assessment of how a product might be used and what would be the implications of that.
These are big decisions with important implications, both for individuals, for the health service, financial implications too. So that's a very responsible position you were in. Did you feel that you brought with you some essential statistical skills that were valuable to have in that kind of setting?
Absolutely. I haven't actually performed any statistical analyses for many years now, but I like to think that I have always brought the logic, rigour and organisation that all statisticians show. And indeed now I sort of sit on health boards and various committees, and whenever the word statistics is mentioned, everybody looks at me, even though they know I'm not a practicing statistician anymore, because it's actually very important to just step back and look at issues in a logical way and try to present evidence clearly to understand how evidence has been collected, how it has been analysed and how it's been interpreted. And I think it's those sort of issues that I bring to every part of my working life.